sit back in your seats, get something to eat, and watch this movie. Don't let the kiddies see it, because, well, we'll let you hear the beginning first. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Left of the Projector. I am your host, Evan, back again with another film discussion from the left. Before we get into our conversation this week, I wanted to make a couple quick housekeeping announcements. The first, in addition to the already existing TikTok account, Left of the Projector Pod, and YouTube account, Left of the Projector Pod, you can also follow the show on Instagram at also Left of the Projector Pod. So whatever your platform of choice is, but yes, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram at Left of the Projector Pod. Well, thank you for joining me, Emlie. Actually, joining me again, Emlie, for this week where we are going to talk about the classic movie Jaws. This is always a favorite of mine. I wouldn't say I've seen it maybe as many times as you said you've seen it, but it's a great movie.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to talk about it. The movie has a lot of sentimental value to me. It's one of my whole family's all-time favorite films.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I feel like recording this is going to come out right after Labor Day. And I know this movie takes place on July 4th, so I felt like it was a good one to do in this time of year. And, you know, really just jumping straight into this movie, a lot of people have different critiques of the film itself. I mean, again, plot straightforward. You have shark kills child, you know, in the water, and they're investigating it, and the mayor kind of brushes it aside. And so we have the whole adventure of them catching the shark. And so I don't know, when you watch it now, how do you perceive or view like the actual shark? Because I've heard some different perspectives.
I've never actually watched it as thinking of the shark as a metaphor for anything. And it was, I can't remember exactly which podcast it was of yours, where you actually said that the shark could represent capital. And I kept that in mind while watching it this time. So I do have some fun notes about that. But as far as before that suggestion on your part, I always just saw the shark, you know, as the mysterious animal that it was portrayed as.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember which episode I mentioned. I may have been one of the guests who mentioned that. I think that's actually what sparked thinking of doing the movie. And then I was talking about it offline. And then I watched it when I was staying at the beach a couple weeks ago, which is also a funny thing. But yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I don't ever really remember perceiving the shark as like a thing or an entity or a metaphor. But like in this movie, you know, the very setup is that after the shark kills a small girl, the medical examiner is sort of hiding how the shark died, because the community where this takes place is an island in New England, and they rely heavily on tourism, which I think is a major part of this movie, is that they don't want to close the beach, because if they do, this town will lose like its busiest weekend of the year. And so their entire economy revolves around presumably just a couple months or even just this weekend as being such a heavy thing. So I think that's one thing, aspect of capitalism, is that people rely too heavily on a single thing or a single event to propel themselves, you know, for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole profit incentive and the systemic failure that if you don't meet like your quotas, that you're just screwed. There's no safety net that this town seems to have in case something of this nature is to transpire. So, I mean, I think that rings very true to how we all see capitalism today and how we experience living in it today. Absolutely.
Sort of like the setup, you know, after the, we kind of can discuss the characters. So you have the police chief, Brody, who's kind of wants to protect the people. He's probably like one of the few characters really in the movie, because there aren't that many, but where he really does, you know, feel a need to protect people. And so you're kind of actually left in this dilemma of kind of feeling like you want to side with the cop who's trying to do the right thing in this. But I don't know, do you side with him at the end? I mean, he's kind of like the, you know, the quote unquote good guy.
He is the good guy. He is that cliched, old-fashioned rendition of the cops versus robbers. You know, they are the good guys, especially in the 1970s when this movie came out. He's also like, you know, I'm all for ACAB. Like we all know how leftists feel about the police, and I'm no exception. But he is incontrovertibly the voice of reason in this specific scenario. I just wish he wasn't the police chief, to be honest. It would have been cool if he was like, I don't know, a sanitation worker, anything else.
Right. We don't have to go on and on about Brody. I was going to mention the other characters. So we have Hooper, who is the sort of the shark expert that they bring in. And we also have Quint, who is the comic relief in this movie. He's the shark expert who's going to help them catch the shark. And then we have the mayor, who only really appears in a couple scenes. But I think, I think we should start, from that aspect of it, of the fact that the mayor is insistent upon keeping the beach open because of this tourism aspect. And he doesn't care about the well-being of the people. And I think we discussed this offline. I mentioned this reminds me a lot of like COVID and the response in the United States of, we don't really care if some people die of COVID, so long as they can still go to work and produce money for capitalists. I think it's kind of the same thing here, right?
Some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
He is 100% the living embodiment of profit over people. They portrayed it perfectly in this character. Because they literally have the girl at the beach gets murdered in the beginning, and then like the little boy, he's the second victim, and he knows it, and he just wants to open the beaches anyway, exactly like how our country was with quarantine.
Yep.
There are some establishments that never shut down, the essential worker kind of thing.
But people sort of forget how much those frontline workers had to do. And, they're sacrificing themselves so that profits can continue. And basically the mayor has sacrificed the two children. And there's also, I think we also are led to believe that one of the sailors had gone out to try and catch the shark and also dies because they find his boat. So 3 people die, 4? Well, 3 people.
I think 3 at that point, because at this point we haven't got to the scene where, the 4th of July weekend hasn't happened
Right. Yeah. So the mayor is basically here just letting business as usual. And this is where I want to mention very briefly, just because I did a little side looking into this. So this was based on a book for people who didn't know. The book rights were sold before, the movie rights were sold before the book ever came out. And in the movie, the mayor has ties to the mob. Now, you mentioned just before this that you think that they actually do hint to that. So I don't know, maybe you should mention that, because the idea is that the reason in the book the mayor keeps it open is they're using kind of the mafia as an excuse, where I feel like it is just an excuse. I mean, it doesn't mean that it's not something that could really exist, especially New England, perhaps, fancy real estate on this little island. So it's not that hard to imagine, but they do hint at it briefly in the movie.
Oh yeah, it's hinted at in 2 aspects very blatantly in the film. When the mayor is introduced, the chief, who is in the process of closing the beaches on his own volition, this was right after the first shark attack. The mayor corners him on this ferry boat. It pulls up in his Cadillac car, and a bunch of these guys come out. They're all wearing fedoras. They got their shirts kind of buttoned down to their chests. They got their jackets hanging over their shoulders. It's all very 1930s gangster vibe. So that image was a depiction, a hats off, if you will, to that aspect of the book. And then again, with the medical examiner, there's a scene where the medical examiner changes his mind from saying the death was secondary to shark attack and says it's a boating accident.
Yep.
And the chief is all like, you're going to stand by this? And it's very obvious he's intimidated. He's giving the mayor's side eyes. He's like, yeah, I'll stand by it.
Exactly. Yeah, like, we'll break your legs if you don't if you don't tell them that it was a shark.
Intimidated. Mm-hmm. Bullied.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think if you didn't know about the book aspect, I think you kind of would have just, I mean, I never noticed those scenes more than just kind of like, I just kind of, in my head, I always thought like, oh, it's like the business community kind of deal. But, when there is business communities, there can always be there could be elements of organized crime, of course. And the thing that I think the kind of the turning point, maybe where we get to the second act of this movie, is when Quint shows up at the town sort of meeting. It seems like it's not a town hall, but it's basically like the community of businesses, the mayor, the police chief are all there. And he comes in, he has I don't even want to mention the word because that's like the one paint. The scariest part of this movie is when Quint comes in and he puts his hands on the chalkboard, and makes that horrible screech. And his little like speech then is so great. And I think, again, this is another instance where there isn't a lot of like class analysis in this movie, although I think we can touch on some. But I don't know how you perceive Quint as being this, working class veteran, but he's also in there to take advantage of the town in some sense. So I don't know how you perceive Quint's role earlier. Maybe it changes in the movie, but I don't know how you see it.
So Quint is my favorite character. He's special to me. So, I mean, there's really no denying that he does go in there and demands $10,000 to find and kill the shark. He says, I'll find him for 5 and I'll catch him and kill him for 10, which in the 70s, this is roughly $60,000 is what it translates to. I actually looked it up. They were offering $3,000 for bounty. The woman whose son was killed, a personal bounty, and that is $16,500 1970s time, and $10,000 is $55,000. So that is quite a lump sum there. But what he says prior to asking for this sum is, I value my neck a lot more than $3,000, Chief. Yeah. So basically what he's saying is that I'm not going to go out there and risk my life for $16,000, because let's put it up to inflation today. So he's demanding what he's due for risking his neck. So they can keep all their businesses on a paying basis, as he says in the film.
Yeah, and the thing about it is, you have to, I think when you put it that way, he is, you might say he's kind of taking advantage, but at the same time, he's been, as we learn later, he's been through hell when he was in, served in the military in World War II. So he wants to, get something. I mean, he doesn't have like a fancy lifestyle. He drinks like homemade schnapps. He wants a case of schnapps, or maybe it's 2 later when part of his little deal. So he really doesn't, he's not like he's asking for money to, retire or whatever. Or maybe that is at this point. He just wants to like live, a quiet life. So you kind of feel for him, especially later. So I think I might, if I had that sense that before he was kind of taking advantage of it, I feel like I kind of recant. And I think that or maybe you're meant to, now I'm like kind of, now I'm conflicted by it. But
that's
I think
great. That's good in a character. Gray areas those are good characters. That's more realistic in a person anyhow.
Yeah, no, that's true for sure. And I think, I was trying to think of another aspect that he plays out, but assuming that there is this mafia element, and he seems to know a lot about the town, presumably, I feel like he's one to kind of get the sense. And, I think later in the movie, I wrote down a quote where, he talks about a bad fish and he says, you don't want to be on welfare for the winter. I think it's in that very first line. I have it here. He says, if you want to play a chief, be on welfare the whole winter. So he knows that they're fucked if they don't use him, basically. And so he's finally getting a little peace for himself. Can't blame him.
He's working the system for himself, as so many of us working class people are forced to do in order to get ahead, sacrifice a little bit of morals and ethics in order to achieve some semblance of comfort. I'm sure we can all relate to a little bit of that every once in a while. However, you said something a second ago where you said he's just trying to get what he's due or get ahead. I think that's true as well. He is a working class man and under capitalism, and he has to do what he has to do to sort of make himself comfortable. And if you recollect when they do the whole 3,000 for the bounty, and there's that scene where all these people are coming from out of town and all these folks are coming from all around to try and catch the shark. this just goes to show that so many working class people are always looking for that quick break because laboring is so difficult and it's so hard a lot of the time that everyone's dream is to sort of be liberated from that stress.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that because the next little note I wrote after his little speech was, when almost exactly what you're saying is that the people were chasing this reward because people were trying to, I wrote down, the people are just trying to, quote, win in the game of capitalism. Like it's a gambling system where it's rigged for most people, against most people, I should say. And so these people out there trying to chase, I hate to use a cliche of the American dream, but I feel like in the 70s, that was still a thing that people thought that was possible. I think now people are not under that same illusion. So I think, you saw all those people, like people were getting into boats and there's too many people and, it was crazy. And I think it's actually pretty interesting and a good segue where this is where we're introduced to Hooper, who's the scientist, who's coming in, who's a shark expert. And he's there trying to help bridge the gap between like the cop, the chief, Brody, and the mayor, and, Quint, and kind of acting as this like person of reason. But I don't feel like he's a very likable character, even though I think you're meant to like him the most. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe you're not supposed to like him.
Petty bourgeois enters stage right. He's like totally the representation of the wealthy middle class. We've got Quinn representing the working class. We've got Brody as the police who we know protect capitalist interest. And now we've got the bridge. We got the neoliberal middle class representation in Hooper, I think.
Yeah, that's what I wrote the same note. I said he's kind of like the guy in there to, I don't think I used the word bridge the gap. Oh, I think I wrote stopgap, kind of like the stopgap on the shark or capital, like but really all he can do is offer a Band-Aid. So, you kill the shark, but it's an ocean. There's lots more fucking sharks.
Yeah. Yeah. And also he's more there to like identify the shark and be like, yes, the girl was killed by the shark, but he can't actually like really hunt the shark. That wasn't really his role, right? Like that's when he needed a laborer. They needed to hire somebody, or else Hooper would have insisted, no, we don't need to hire Quinn. I can catch the shark. But he never said.
And the way he does it is he just throws a bunch of like fancy gadgets that he didn't really know how to use, or he like kind of knew how to use. He read the manual, because you learn he's wealthy. He came from money. He used his money to go to, they don't say what college he goes to. But yeah, I think later there's a good line when they're on the boat, where Quint says to Hooper, he says, "You college boys don't have the education to admit when you're wrong," which I thought was a great line. I know that's a little further ahead, but it's kind of like nodding to the, the wealthy, educated person who's trying to do some good, but really he can't really, it's just a stopgap.
Well, it proves one thing, Mr. Hooper. It proves that you wealthy college boys don't have the education enough to admit when you're wrong.
Yeah, and also just the whole tone of like intellectual superiority that Hooper carries with him in every scene he appears in is also at play. During that scene when Quinn calls him out by saying, "You wealthy college boys don't have the education to admit when you're wrong," it's because he's being so smarmy that Quinn says that in the first place, because he's facetious, flippant, and his tone is like teasing and just belittling.
Yeah, Quinn definitely, like when they're on the boat for the last act of the movie, he's always, very, acts very, rude towards him for good reason. And then there's one little note I put in here. I know this is kind of cutting off some of it, but the thing that I find so funny about this movie, and it's kind of like a little side, maybe just something to make it, I don't know how to describe it, but so the chief, Brody, is scared of the water. He leaves New York to live on this little island, and he like can't go on a boat unless he's drunk, I think is basically what they say, which I find just like, it's funny to me. I don't know how to describe otherwise.
Yeah, why would you move there?
Right. And I think he says, I think there's a line when he's talking to maybe his wife to get ready for the expedition for the shark. He says that he left New York because he couldn't make a difference because there was so much crime. Okay, so you stop quote unquote, stop a murder. They don't actually stop any murders, but you can just pretend that they do. And here he can make a difference because, he can actually catch the people because it's this little island and, there really isn't any crime anyway.
Right. He even says there hasn't been a murder or something in over 25 years in that town. It's when him and Hooper go on the boat and he's hella wasted. So
the other thing too that I think is interesting about Hooper's character as this kind of neoliberal type person is that to him, I mean, he is a scientist, or I don't know if they ever say he's like gone and like gotten his PhD or anything like that, but it really is like a hobby to him. It's really just like this thing he can do because he can afford to. And so he doesn't really have any like stake in it other than like his own personal satisfaction. He doesn't really care about saving the town, right? I think that kind of plays hard into the neoliberal ideology anyway. They don't really care about saving or fixing anything. They just want to like paper over it and make you, feel good about it.
Yeah. Individualism. He's not in there to help the town. He's in there to serve his own interest in sharks.
Right.
So, I mean, he's obviously painting a picture or putting forth a front that he cares about the town. You know how he's all like, those guys are in the harbor aren't even going to make it out alive. And he's all like smarmy and sarcastic, like that, for example. Like, that's like a display of caring. His tone isn't caring. His body language isn't nurturing. Like there's nothing about that's actual care. It's just the words.
Yeah, and when also the chief is I think he asked him to, stop letting so many people on boats and all these things. He sort of, says a few things, but really it's not he doesn't feel it's his problem. Like you said, he cares about his own survival. He's got this fancy shark cage he's going to use, which I think is ironic that the shark then destroys it. What's that?
Immediately, he goes in the water, and like 2 minutes later, the shark's like, and it's broken.
Exactly. And then he doesn't actually, he kind of hides, not because he's obviously scared of this giant shark, but he's hiding. Yeah. He's hiding down. I'd be down there scared too. That thing was enormous when you actually saw it.
It's true story, actually. A tangent for right now. I was surfing one time at Stinson Beach, and I was paddling out, and in the fucking surf, I saw the outline of a fucking great white. They feed in those waters, and I have never been so scared in my God. Time. It is so scary. I can't describe with words.
Yeah, I had a speaking of maybe not the same experience, but I don't like going in the ocean anymore. I had like a near drowning experience, more than 15 years ago, 14 years ago, something like that. And so I'll go in there a little bit, but I'm like now afraid of it. I'm Brody. I'm scared. I'll go on a boat. Like I'm not scared of boats. I don't get like seasick, but it just in the ocean. No dice for me.
Well, it's smart on your part. The ocean is very powerful and can be quite cruel.
Some of the other little notes I wrote, I think this is actually still before they go out. I think it's kind of, I know we've talked about parts of the last, act of the movie, but some little funny notes that I wrote is when they're getting ready to go out. And I think it's during the July 4th weekend, and they're right before they send Quint out there, they show like a little beach area like along, not the boardwalk because it doesn't seem like there is one, but there are some kids playing like a shark video game where you literally catch a shark like in one of those like old school video games that I thought was pretty hilarious. And the really funny vandalized shark sign for the city, there's like the woman swimming on the billboard, and they draw the little shark man. I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, and then the mayor is like super peeved about it. He's like more peeved about the vandalism of advertisement than he is about the people dying from the shark attacks.
That's literally what I wrote down. I wrote down that the mayor cares more about like the Brody catching the person who vandalized their town, because that literally would prevent people and remind them of the would remind them of the shark instead of the literal killer.
Brody, sick vandalism. That is a deliberate mutilation of a public service message. Now, I want those little paint-happy bastards caught and hung up by their Buster Browns.
Yeah, he wants to just pretend it's not happening and get his money.
Yeah, and my other note that I wrote there was that the mayor, it was Vaughn. I know I've been saying the Mayor Vaughn, and saying how he needs to quote unquote feed capital. You know, he needs to feed the city's economy. Literally, without that weekend, essentially the town would go broke, and people would move out, and he'd lose his mayorship, and he'd lose his little bit of power he holds.
Right. And I've got a little thought just here. How do you like this one? Maybe it's not even about keeping the town's economy running, but how we discussed his mafia ties. Maybe it's more about keeping his donors happy. The metaphor for lobby, the corruption of the government. You know what I mean? Like,
no, that makes sense, because I can see where you might have come from that, because he wants to stay in power as mayor. I mean, I realize it's a small town, but privilege comes along with him being the mayor of the town. He gets benefits, and he needs people on his side, the mafia or the business owners. So without them, he loses his chance. I mean, that's very much like, like you said, lobbyist corruption of politics is where, senators and congressmen are saying all kinds of nonsense and doing nonsense because they need someone to donate to their campaign.
Yeah. And they're taking bribes and passing legislation to the detriment of their citizens, of their constituents, in order to make profit for certain people, just like Mayor Vaughn is doing.
Right. I had a TikTok video on my previous account where I think it was like a really short thing. It was saying, can we start calling lobbying what it really is, and it's corporate bribery? Because that's how it is. Like, we just use the word lobbying with my heavy quotation mark fingers, because that's just what we want to call it to make it legal.
Exactly. It's like when they call the 1% of Russia oligarchs, but they call ours capitalists.
Right.
It's like, it's the same picture, bro.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the you have Pam from the office being like, "Yep, that's the same thing. You can call them whatever you want. You can." Right. And then in Europe, they'll be like, "Oh, entrepreneurs," or something.
Right.
It's like
timid names to make them less malevolent than they are.
Yeah, they have to sound nice and friendly here, in our hell capitalist country, versus if you're in Norway, you're just trying to get by with a few billion on your side.
Exactly. But here in America, we got to put a little silicone plexiglass spin on everything. Pseudophone.
Yeah.
Capitalism.
I think maybe the last, we have plenty of time to talk more, but I think the last act of the movie is where they get onto the boat and they're getting ready. And one of the lines I wrote down here, I think this might be as they're getting prepared. Hooper says to Quint, "You need to stop this working class hero crap," which, again, he recognizes what Quint is and like what role he plays. And he hates that he's being and calling him out. Usually like liberals and neoliberals and, those they get very upset when you call them what they are. And I think this is no exception.
Yeah. And it's also the classic case of, I'm going to just say the human condition. Sometimes when you get shown a mirror, you get a little peeved off because, I don't know, it makes you feel a type of way. But what Quinn was doing was he was being patronizing to him. He was belittling Hooper, which Hooper is doing to everybody throughout the entire film.
Yeah,
it's funny that when someone does it to him for 5 seconds, he immediately flips out and points fingers to class antagonisms immediately.
Yes.
Immediately.
It kind of gives me the vibe of, I know this isn't the same with like a liberal, but you have like a conservative or a reactionary who will spew all kinds of nonsense. And if you say like, no, what the hell are you talking about? You're a blank reactionary. And then they flip out at you because, somehow you've misrepresented them. They want to portray themselves, or I kind of view that too as like people who, are like liberals who might say they're leftists and they are, get upset when you uncover their little facade.
Have you ever seen A Few Good Men?
Oh yeah, of course, absolutely.
You can't handle the truth.
Yes, exactly. That would be. It's funny. I don't have that on my list of movies, but it's such like a famous. Obviously, that scene itself, but it's such an interesting movie, and maybe I don't want to go too far on a tangent about talking about it, but it's a interesting movie about the military industrial complex, but from like a micro level, as opposed to a war. It's about just a simple thing that happens like on a military base. It's kind of a interesting movie. I don't know if you remember the whole thing and all how it goes.
Yeah, no, I remember, but this is a slippery tangent because I'm sure you and I.
Yeah. I won't. Maybe A Few Good Men bonus episode coming soon, but don't hold me on that. But yeah, so now we have the last part of the movie where they're on the boat and they're trying to catch the shark. And, this is again where, Hooper and Quint are constantly having their, back and forth. And I think one of the coolest exchanges, and I think also maybe I think you mentioned is a pretty powerful scene, is when they're comparing their battle scars, I got bit by this shark, or I got, bit by that one. And then Quint goes on to tell them that he was on the USS Indianapolis, which they can't believe. And he tells his story. And I feel like when I watched this again just the other week, I was just kind of stunned. I mean, I knew the scene, but I still feel like it's like, it hits you hard.
It is so captivating, that monologue. It's so dark, and the fact that it's a real historical event like that it really happened,
right?
If I'm not mistaken. Perhaps we should give a little backstory on what exactly USS Indianapolis was, and what went down then. Yeah,
so the U.S. and so the USS Indianapolis was in charge of dropping a bomb on Japan during World War II. So he was presumably
delivered it,
delivered the bomb, right? And so presumably Quint is describing him being on the submarine, which then is they have to basically disavow it existing because they had to pretend like it didn't, even exist for safety. I guess it was kind of, I think it says like it's radio silent, or I don't know the term. Top secret, right. So, it's basically once it gets into enemy territory in Japan, they can't really man a rescue mission for a while. And so they're all, the submarine sunk and they're all in the water, and the sharks are picking off him and his friends, like, one by one. And I think, 75% of the people end up getting, eaten by sharks in these waters. And this kind of leads to his lifelong quest of drinking schnapps that he makes and God knows what, and killing sharks, because it's like his lifelong, I don't want to say retribution or his calling. I don't know how you might describe it, but I don't know, did I leave anything out?
No, I mean that's the basis of the tale, that he says like 1,300 men go into the water, 300 come out.
Yep.
And those were like the real numbers too. So those sharks had a smorgasbord with the U.S. military that night.
Yeah. He said, I have the thing open. He says by the end of the first dawn, they lost 100 men, averaging 6 an hour. And on Thursday morning, like he was, and I think one of his friends was a baseball player, Herbie Robinson. And he says he thought he was asleep, but it turns out that half his body had been, eaten. So literally the guy who's right next to him. So it could have been him. I mean, it's one of those, eat or be eaten kind of situations, if you will. And so I think, this scene, I think I alluded to it, makes you understand why, he did this thing, good or bad. That's a whole nother debate, the bomb on Hiroshima. He did this because he was told to in the military. And then now he's kind of been cast out by the military. They don't really give a crap about him. And so he's looking for a little payday to live a nice little comfortable life at the end. And then he gets his comeuppance, unfortunately.
He really does. But also touching on how the U.S. military doesn't take care of their own. I don't know if you remember in his monologue, but he actually mentions that the mission was so secret, like no one knew about it. But, some people knew about it, but they purposefully did not put them missing for over a week because they wanted to maintain the secrecy of the mission because they hadn't dropped the bomb yet. Like the bomb still needed to be dropped. It was still their backup plan. So like literally the military was like, yeah, just let him, bob there for a little while we make sure everything is classified and everything is good. And then we'll go pick them up. So they literally just tossed their own to the sharks, literally.
Yeah, right.
To maintain their top secret mission so they could then go kill not billions, but millions of more people in Japan.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it says, I think the line says, the mission was so secret that no distress signal had been sent. So They're basically, and just like his description. And I feel like during the scene, they don't really show, I'm trying to remember, they don't really show Brody and Hooper's sort of reaction to it. I think maybe at the end they do, but it's sort of like, you didn't need to see them. I feel like he kind of, at that point, I think Hooper after that kind of just, you don't really see them have much of a animosity towards him. It's sort of like, okay, fine. I did this. And then the last line he says before the little monologue was over, he says, anyway, we delivered the bomb. He's like, yep, even though they ate all these people, this is what we did. Yeah,
it's almost like what I always gathered from that, and this is not just this time, this is how I've always felt like since I was a girl, that he felt like the shark attack happened to them because they delivered the bomb. Like he thinks of it like
interesting.
This was his instant karma. And also one of the reasons why he said that he'll never wear a life jacket again. One, because we don't want to go through that again, but also because he's not deserving of life.
I think it sounds like he understands the weight of what he did and presumably didn't want to. I mean, most people who join the military, I guess World War II was an instance of,
drafted.
Right. So, some people had no choice, but not only were you drafted, you didn't have any choice or idea of what you were going to be doing. No one knew. Some people got lucky and they were stationed somewhere easy, and some people were dropped at, on D-Day. So, he got his lot in life. And so, he was, maybe he wasn't living, a comfortable, life or a life of happiness, but he did what he liked to do, it seemed. Even if it was a lifelong, mission to kill sharks.
His vendetta.
Vendetta. That was the word I was trying to think about. I kept saying vengeance, but that's the wrong V word.
It's anonymous though.
Yeah. So the end of this movie, as we all know, they're finally able to shoot the not one, not two, but three of the little barrels. And I'll make a funny little note about why the barrels ended up in the movie. Anyway, but so they finally get the barrels in, and so that really still doesn't deter this monstrous shark. And so the shark is, going after them, and the last, 15 minutes of the movie is pretty wild. And finally, which is, I think is so funny that he shoots the explosive, out of his mouth of the tank that was sort of like, they alluded to earlier how it was like rolling around, as they do in a movie, the tank's rolling around. It might get loose and blow up them, but instead it blows up the shark. Right. And so it was pretty cool. But so you say you can respond, then I'll mention the barrel thing.
Well, I wanted to touch on something before we get into that last scene. I wanted to touch on, do you remember how Quinn destroys the radio?
Yes.
Why? I've never really been able to ascertain exactly why he wanted to. Part of I was watching with my partner, and they were saying that it's because Quinn doesn't want to share the money, the prize money with anyone that might come and help them with the shark. That was one interpretation. But I don't know if I subscribe to that right off the bat. What do you think? Why do you think?
Well, my theory is actually a new one that I just thought of. Only not this exact second, but as you mentioned it, I think it came into play with the U.S. Indianapolis, where they had no contact, they had no way to send a distress signal. They're kind of out there. They're just going to do what they have to do, and if they get rescued, they get rescued. So he's kind of leaving it up to fate again, where he's saying, like, we're not going to connect with them. If we kill this shark, we kill this shark, and we're going to come in as heroes, or we're going to die as legends, or whatever it is. So I feel like he just wants to, I feel like he's like preparing himself to die for this shark.
Yeah, like, not like, you're not going to take this from me. It's me or the shark. It's personal now, and I'll be damned if you get in the way, kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, I think that would be I mean, I don't know that I thought of this before. I always felt the same way too. I never really understood why he did it. It's like, don't you want to not die and maybe get rescued? But I mean, I think both are valid. I think he definitely did want all the money for himself. Hooper didn't need any money. The cop, Brody wasn't going to take it because technically he's a quote unquote public servant. So he's not going to get any reward money. So maybe you're right. Maybe it is just about the money.
Well, that wasn't my interpretation.
Oh, right. You said your partner.
I was over here being like, I don't really understand his motivations for destroying the radio. Your whole, it's either me or the shark sort of thing makes sense to his character.
Yeah.
But again, that was such a dick move.
Yeah.
To destroy the radio.
Yeah, that was, I mean, and the it's almost like, and then part of me, I also was thinking at the time, like, he didn't want, interruptions. He didn't want there to be, he didn't want someone else to screw it up to, like he definitely has his way of doing things. And if someone's out there messing with his, messing with it, it would, I don't know. You can tell he had his way of things.
Even when Hooper tried to like interject, like, we can use my cage or we can use homing devices, he was like, shut up, Hooper, you're just supercargo.
Yeah. Right, exactly. And so so I guess you're right though. So he's kind of just saying, we're going to be out here till the end. And then he literally does. And like the way he ends up dying, I mean, obviously there's really only one way a shark can kill you. It just eats you. And it's so brutal. It's such like a sad thing because if it hadn't been him at the edge of the boat when it starts, sliding down, it could have been one of the other men, or no, I guess it couldn't have been Hooper because he was in the water at that time.
He was
but it
hiding in the sea.
I mean, it could have been Brody. But I think for the movie, you needed Quint to die. The anti-type hero, I guess you could say. I think I wrote that as like a little note. He's the anti-hero, even though he isn't the one who kills the shark. He really does all the work to get there.
They wouldn't have been able to get there without him. He was essential. But yeah, I think that him dying in the end was good writing on their part. His death is the most impactful. I don't think it would have been twice as impactful if it was either of the other two characters that had been Jaws's dinner.
Yeah, right.
Right, but obviously one of the three main characters had to be killed by Jaws. If they hadn't, it would have just been boring. I don't know.
No, I mean, I think you're right.
Like that. Anticlimactic, that's what it would be. He's just fun. He's got some of the best lines. He's just very zany. You can tell all his marbles, some of them are gone. Yeah. So he's just
he has some very funny like little lines, and I think most people like his introduction after the scene with the chalkboard and everything is just so funny. He's telling these little, limericks, or I don't know how you would call them. He's like, here lies the body of Mary Lee, died at the age of 103. For 15 years, she kept her virginity. Not a bad record for this vicinity.
His little rhymes, and he just, breaks out into random metaphors. I won't even attempt them because he compares things to paper cutting and
that I read that line, so that I didn't have that one from memory. I did it. Maybe I'll cut my talking and just have him say it in that spot if I can find it on YouTube. But yeah, so I guess the end of the movie, we know like you said, or I said, Brody ends up shooting the canister that's inside of his mouth and blows up Jaws. And then Hooper kind of slinks out of the water. You know, maybe you think he's dead, but I feel like in my mind, when I first saw it, I just assumed he would be alive.
I mean, they show him going to go hide in the seaweed. They show him going in to help. So, I mean, we know that Brody thinks he might be dead, but exactly. That's right. Exactly. We know he's alive, but Brody thinks he's like the sole survivor. And then they make it in. Oh, so I know what I was going to mention before we maybe talk about the very end and last thoughts, but the canisters, what are they called? The yellow, like the oxygen ones, or the thing, barrel?
the barrels. Yes, the barrels. So apparently the whole thing with the barrels partly came about because of the malfunction with the mechanical shark. So they couldn't show as many scenes with the shark. So so they had the idea, I think, he took some barrels like from the set and like banged them up and painted them and kind of made them look old to use as part of it. I mean, maybe they had some sense of it somewhat, but that got added. And I think it's so cool too, because it shows like the power of the shark.
Yeah. I didn't know that's why they used the barrels. I was over here thinking that was like a regular fishing technique. Like it was, that's what you did. So that's kind of world changing for me right now, but that's fun trivia. I thought that was like normal. That's
but I don't see. It's funny. I went down like a rabbit hole trying to like see like how many. My first was like, how many barrels do you need to like pull down a shark? And something's like, oh well, then of course everything comes up is for Jaws. And it seemed to me that it is something they do, but they made it such a focal point of the movie because of the mechanical. So it's both.
I see.
But I feel like more research might be needed.
It seems like most things that come up are about Jaws. Well, look at that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll try to find the article or two that I bookmarked earlier in the show notes for anyone who wants to do it, or you can follow me on Instagram or TikTok and tell me I'm wrong about all this. If I have any shark experts out there, if there's a Hooper out there who wants to come on and tell me the real meaning behind the barrels. But from the things I did read, it did sound like because the shark was so big, it does actually explain how much energy would be required to pull the barrels under. It's something like 500 somethings, whatever the measurement is, to pull it underwater. So there's never been a shark could be big enough to physically pull 3 barrels. So that's what they made the shark seem so big by having 3 too. So now I've gone on a long tangent about the damn barrels.
Yeah, no, I mean, I get that there are like 3 barrels is astronomical weight for the shark to drag down, because even Quinn is like, not with 3, he can't do it with 3.
Right.
Then he does it with 3. But yeah, obviously Jaws is supposed to be looking pretty powerful because of this. He is apparently 25 feet long and 3 tons, as they said in the movie.
Right, exactly. And so, the whole size of the shark is crazy, but I guess this is the point. So apparently, okay, I'm going to interject here before I get to that. So apparently that it's technically illegal to hunt sharks using the buoyant barrels or poison tips or guns. You have to use some kind of, line. So I guess that's, like a bounty hunter or an illegal hunter of some sort might do it to preserve the shark in some way. So maybe it is something that's done, but it's like it's not socially acceptable in the catching realm.
I see.
More. I'm gonna probably spend the next 30 minutes after this looking this up, because now I kind of want to know the actual truth. The truth behind Jaws.
No, you're on it. It's a brain worm now.
Exactly. And I feel like I spent some time doing it, but I feel like my efforts, maybe I'll have to cut some of that, the shark barrel nonsense, but, I don't know. So I guess we kind of went through the whole thing. And I think what's interesting maybe at the end is, so they blow up the shark, but I think I mentioned before, there's sequels to this movie. There's more sharks in the sea. There's more capitalists in America and the world. It's not like you can kill one shark and then be done. Like Hooper helped kill the shark, but he only could kill the one shark. You can vote one guy out of office, but there's always another guy.
Damn them.
Yes. But I don't know, did you have any final thoughts about the movie, whether it's, any of the things we've discussed or just any other asides?
Well, not necessarily. I think we covered the pretty blatant class analysis aspects of the movie. Yeah, I mean, it's Jaws. I love it. It's shark attacks. It's a horror film. It began the trope of hiding the monster from view.
Yeah, that's for sure. At 74, 75.
Yeah, totally. I mean,
it created the blockbuster. The idea of a blockbuster with movie was created because of how well this movie did.
Yeah, absolutely, it did. And it's funny that it was by happenstance because it was like their shark puppet broke. But I actually have a thought about the ending of the movie, a metaphorical take.
Sure.
So, Quinn is eaten, and then Hooper and Brody swim off into the sunset or sunrise back to shore. So it's almost like, how we decided that Quinn is the representation of the working class, while Hooper is the representation of petty bourgeois, and obviously the cop is the cop. So it's funny that Quinn is the one who gets eaten by the shark, especially if we're looking at it as representing capitalism, and then the petty bourgeois and the cop get to swim away in the end back home.
Yeah, that's kind of fitting, and you can, and it's interesting. I mean, I know this movie can't. I'm gonna stretch this too far here, but you have them swimming away. I realize this is the mid 70s, but we're kind of moving into the end of the 70s, end of the larger wars, Vietnam and so on, going into the 80s, where the total final nail in the coffin of working class people begins, and they're off. They're going to go swim back to their cozy little island, and the cop he's like retiring, but he's almost like he retired Brody to this little cozy island. Then Hooper is going to go back and have his money and be fine. So they, like you said, they are fine, and the middle class, or the working class guy, gets killed.
That's right. And the working class guy gets thrown into the shark's gullet.
Literally, he is sacrificed to the capitalist or capitalism, or whatever shark metaphor you folks out there want to call it.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, I feel like that's a good final segue, Emily, for our episode on Jaws. And so, again, you'll be listening to this episode on your post Labor Day weekend. So, just as a little shout out, we are going to have some episodes in October on Halloween-esque type movies. So for horror fans out there, I'm going to definitely do Halloween and Alien and some others. So look forward to that in the future. And thank you, Emily, for joining me once again. It's been great.
Thank you for having me. It was great. I had a wonderful time.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for listening to Left of the Projector, and I will see you next time.